Hungry meaning like, are you just going to do the absolute minimum and then check out? Or are you willing to sort of go above and beyond? You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but can you trust that person in a board meeting or an important meeting that they're not going to say something stupid?
The other thing that people underestimate, one of the best things about hiring really talented people is the only people they're going to bring into the organization are really talented people. Imagine having direct access to someone who's navigated life's toughest terrains and come out stronger. Someone who's been there, done that, and can guide you with empathy, experience, and honesty. This isn't just advice. It's a lifeline, a strategy session, a chance to learn from my journey so you can accelerate yours. Without the ability to be self-aware and introspective, the ability for you to get to where you want to go, nearly impossible. Hey everyone, I've been asked by some of my new followers to provide a bit more of my background since much of my content is me interviewing people I think have interesting and useful insights to provide to others. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to record an episode with Omaid Humayun when he was recently visiting Miami. Omaid's a contributing writer for Forbes and has his own podcast, To the Top, where he focuses on interviewing high-impact individuals from Mike Tyson to Scott Galloway to Simon Sinek to Coach K and dozens more. I hope you enjoy the interview.
David, thanks for having me here. I appreciate you just carving out the time to do this.
Oh, absolutely excited for it.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'd love to get started and just sort of rewind if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I'm curious, what did your parents do for a living and how did that maybe impact some of the career choices you made in your life?
So my mom was initially probably more of a homemaker, you would call her, I guess. And my dad was an entrepreneur. So he started a software company that eventually IPO'd in his late 20s. What drove me to it and actually what drove me to go to business school was he eventually got pushed out of the company he started. And it's because what I realized was it's okay to be bad at things, but it's the kiss of death in business to think you're good at something you're bad at. So I wanted to make sure I knew enough about every functional area of business so at least someone couldn't bullshit me, whether it's finance or accounting, HR, operations, whatever it was. And then my mom eventually got her master's in social work and became a social worker. So I'd say some of my soft skills probably came from my mom's side.
What would you think, thinking back, most important lesson from your parents that you instilled in your kid? What would one of those be, mom or dad?
So I will say, well, they didn't get along that well together. They did agree on one thing, and they both I think did a terrific job in this part, which was they both convinced me that I could pretty much do anything I set my mind to. And I was a really small kid, like freakishly little. Like, back then they probably don't do it now because of wokeness, but they would line you up in size order. And the only one smaller than me was Windsor Kinney. So Windsor Kinney was maybe a quarter inch shorter than me.
Yeah.
But I maybe had about a quarter inch, but I was the second shortest kid in my grade, I think until 8th grade, maybe.
Wow.
So
I
weighed 65 pounds in 7th grade. I only know that because I started wrestling then. So I was in the lightest weight class.
That's funny. Sounds similar to me. I remember my driver's license at 16 said like 125 on it. And I had a lot of weight to gain to play football.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about just your overall career. Like, just walk me through your journey, just in terms of some of the experiences you've had, maybe some of the companies that you've ran over the years. I'd love to just see what that looks like over time.
So my first job out of college, I worked for, it's called Accenture now. Back then it was called Andersen Consulting. And the reason I did that was my dad had said, hey, you should start your career with a company that does, that does a good job training you how to give presentations and things like that. And Andersen Consulting did do a good job. But I was there for 1 year and I barely made it a year. And it was what I realized was places like that, they basically, A players leave, C players get fired, and B players tend to ascend is kind of what I saw. And anyway, so I left when I basically started to look for another job. Then I went to work for another systems integrator called Technology Solutions Company. And what was cool about that, and where I think it really influenced me, was I was 23, and I got what was cool. It was a pure meritocracy. So if you could do the job, you would get the responsibilities. And so I remember I was basically managing a help desk for a $60 million project, and I was 24. Um, I didn't know what a stock option was, but I got 7 of them, and they split 125 to 1. And so when the company IPO'd, like 9 months after I joined, I was worth $300,000 on paper. And like, I like this equity thing. And so I vowed to myself from that point forward, I would never work in a company I didn't have equity in. And I pretty much kept that promise to myself. So I did that. And then I read an article that said the most successful people were people that had an undergraduate degree in computer science or engineering, which I already had a computer science degree, and an MBA from a top 5 business school. So I decided I was going to apply to the business school. So
And you got in immediately?
I did not get in immediately. So actually, so it was, I decided, because it was so expensive to, because you're not going to make an income for 2 years, plus what you're going to have to pay for tuition and, housing and all of that. It's roughly $250,000 between lost income. And that was back then in 1992. So $250,000 between lost income and what you're going to have to spend. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that unless it's really worth it. So I only applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. I said, if I don't get in, I won't go. I got rejected from Stanford and Harvard. I got accepted to Wharton, but I got deferred acceptance. So they said, well, we made a mistake. We admitted too many people, but you're in, but you can't start till a year later. So now I had a year to kill, which I hadn't anticipated. So
what do you do in that year?
Well, I was working for Technology Solutions at the time. So I just worked there for an extra year. But I did have a little bit more of the short timer mentality, I think, because I knew I was going back to school.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, Wharton would have been my first choice if I could have known this part of it. Was Wharton was the only top business school that had something called the Small Business Development Center. It's a SBA funded thing. And so you basically provide free consulting services to Philadelphia startups. And in exchange, they pay 2/3 of your tuition tax free. So between that and 2 other part-time jobs I had, I graduated from Wharton. I paid for it myself, and I graduated with 0 student loans, just because I had all those jobs, and the SBDC in particular. But the education itself, honestly, was almost worthless. But the work at the Small Business Development Center,
you're going to say it was invaluable.
It was completely worthless. I mean, I can count on one hand how many things I learned. Ignore sunk costs and a few other things. Not much. I learned a little bit about, no, not even that. Even the things I learned about financial modeling and forecasting, while there were classes in that, when I had to do it for a client for the Small Business Development Center, that's when you really learn it. And so that was the education I got, was invaluable. So I did a year and a half of my 2 years at the SBDC, and I had probably 30 clients over that period of time. I did everything from market entry strategies for a new consumer electronics product, a financial model to help raise venture capital for, at the time, the most premier, satellite tracking software company in the world, Analytics Graphics, it was called. They were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So I had all these really cool clients, and I had to learn this stuff enough to be able to help them. And so it just forced me to learn things in a way I wouldn't have learned. So
yeah, not to pause too far, but if you're talking to someone today and they ask you, should I get my MBA? What's the general advice you give?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, the only way that I would say you could do it is if you get an executive MBA. Because if you get an executive MBA, one, you're with the high flyers and all these, from the Fortune 500 companies. Your company's paying for you to go. They have to give you the time off to do the work. You get the best professors because they'll fight to teach those courses because they want the consulting opportunities that come from those students. And you still make your income. So if I were going to do it again, I'd do an executive MBA.
Makes sense. Okay. Sorry. Keep going.
No.
Yeah.
So then after that, there's so much groupthink in business school, like you can't even imagine, and maybe you can. But so everyone gets a job either in consulting or finance, And so I had a couple of consulting job offers that I turned down, and I basically did what they call a search fund. So I partnered up with a classmate of mine. We raised money first time I'd ever raised money from angel investors, basically about $450,000, I think we raised. And basically they give you the capital, you make a pittance of a salary. So I had job offers for 150. I was drawing a $50,000 salary, so 1/3 of my market price. But in exchange for that, I would get a 10% interest in the company once we acquired it, and get to run it. So for me, what I wanted was the operating experience. I'm like, I'm 28 years old. How do I get experience running a business when I've never run anything? And so this was the avenue for me to do that. So flash forward about 18 months, we've done 13 acquisitions. So we raised the search fund. We bought our first portfolio company, and then we did 12 more acquisitions on top of that. So I got a lot of M&A experience. I was running a 500-person company by the time I was 29, I think it was. And the company's still around. I'm still friends with the person who was at the time the chief operating officer. She's now the CEO. And that was, I guess that would have been 30 years ago.
Wow. When you started that and you said you were raising capital and you made it sound kind of easy. Was it easy, or did you face a lot of rejection in those early days raising money?
I was terrified of raising capital. In fact, the reason I'd partnered up with this other guy from business school, which ended up being a mistake in hindsight, we could talk about that, but was because, like, for me, like, if I believe in what I'm selling, I'm a pretty good salesman. But I'd never raised money before, so I just didn't think I could be persuasive, and I didn't think anyone would write me a check, honestly. And I was wrong. Like, I actually raised 2/3 of the capital were me closing those deals. And what I realized was it's just about creating momentum. And investors are sheep. It's shocking how little. I mean, look at what happened with places like Theranos and stuff like that. Oh, who else has invested? Oh, that person invested. Here's my check. I still remember this phone call. This guy who had owned a bunch of radio stations in Texas had invested, and he had given me a name of someone, and he goes, "Oh, Spence is in the deal? Great, you'll have my check tomorrow." I'm like, I hang up the phone. I'm like, I was on the phone with this guy for less than 60 seconds. There's no freaking way a $25,000 check is going to show up tomorrow. And it did. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. So I actually think it's harder in a weird way, because I've raised much more money in bigger companies. It's harder to raise $500,000 than it is $5 million.
Wow.
So
yeah.
surprising.
There's this funny, I don't know if you've seen it, but Jesse Itzler, you know him.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
From his wife's Spanx, and he was the NetJet guy, right?
Yeah. There's this really cool, I have to send you this like Instagram sort of reel or whatever, but he tells a story about how he was investing in like Vita Coke, one of those like coconut water companies. And so he calls Alex Rodriguez. He said, "Hey, do you want to make shares in this company?" He's like, "All you have to do is show up at this location and like knock on the window. I'm going to do this thing." And then all you do is go down the elevator and like get on with the rest of your day. He's like, okay. So he's in this like board meeting with these investors and whatnot, trying to broker this deal. And so, A-Rod walks up, gets out of the elevator, knocks on the glass. Jesse looks at his watch and he's like, "I can't. I told you I'll call you at 6:00. And the guys in the office are like, "That's Alex, right?" Like they're huge Yankee fans, right? He's like, "How do you know A-Rod?" And then he's like, shunning him to go and leave because he's busy. But that was like one of the ways that he helped,
Well, it's funny you say that. I remember I told you about the software company my dad had. So his company merged with a marketing company owned by Fran Tarkington, the guy who had been the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. And my dad would tell me these stories where, because his product, my dad wrote the first 4th generation language. So basically it was a program that wrote other programs. And it was the first one that did it, and they eventually IPO'd. But he had the best product out there, and he'd been trying to close his client for 2 years. Fran Tarkington has lunch, signs one football, deal closed. He's like, what the hell? It had nothing to do with the product. Yeah. They had lunch with Fran Tarkington. They got an autographed football.
That's funny. It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
Who would you say has had the biggest impact on your career thus far?
I've had a couple of professional mentors. I guess the person I would say had the biggest impact on me, sort of an interesting story. So when we were doing that roll up in the space where we bought those 13 companies, the search fund, basically they're a bunch of small call center businesses. And we basically centralized all the back office functions and, got some efficiencies and so forth. The woman who who I hired, she basically worked for the biggest company in our space. And the guy was run by a guy who was a COO, ex-COO of Nextel, and was a notorious asshole, just absolute jerk. And so they were doing all these acquisitions, same acquisitions we wanted to do. And so, I basically approached them at a couple conferences and, built a bit of a relationship with them. And I was like, Sharon, I said, why don't you, I said, you can either stay there and basically do whatever he tells you, or you can come here and tell me what to do. And because I knew I didn't know what I was doing, right? And these three ladies had done all these acquisitions. They were playing, they had a lot of credibility because they were the biggest player in the space. And I was actually able to persuade them to leave, it was called Pro Communications. They were the biggest player in our space, and join us. We didn't even have any revenue yet. We hadn't even done our first acquisition. So they did. And so Sharon worked for me technically, but she was my professional mentor. And I would say my leadership style, my management style came directly from her. So she's probably been the biggest influence on me.
That's pretty cool. What do you think made her change her mind?
I think she was tired of working for assholes. I think it really came down to that. And I think that she really did think, I think that she understood that, that I knew some of the same things about finance and raising money and some things like that, that maybe were, and how to manage investors that maybe would be more new to her. And she was really good at some stuff that I didn't know anything about. The same things that the Nextel guy probably knew too, but he was a jerk and I wasn't. So she's like, well, this guy really seems like he'd listen. And I did. So
makes a big difference. There's a book called Jerks at Work.
Yeah.
we should all reread. Okay. So how would you describe just like the last 5 years of your professional career, kind of leading companies? Like, if you had to sort of distill it down, how would you describe it?
A tornado. The last 5 years of my life have been like 5 careers in one. I'm trying to think how many companies I've been at. 4, 5, actually.
And what have you been primarily doing, would you say?
So I was president of a telemedicine company, and at the time that I'd been at for 5 years, and I'd worked for the same CEO twice at that company and a previous company that we'd also had a good financial exit at. And hard guy to work for, to say the least. Him and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot. And he fired me at the height of the pandemic. And he did so, I would argue he did so almost gleefully, to the point where, this will sound crazy, especially given how much money I made this guy. People that make me money are usually my favorite people. But anyway, I joked with the CFO, who's a good friend of mine, still to this day. I was like, oh, he fired me the day after his birthday. I'm surprised he didn't fire me on his birthday. And she said he tried to, he couldn't get the paperwork done in time. So anyway, so that started the last 5 years. And then I worked for a company down here in Miami called I'm Healthy Today that did a back to school COVID program. Then I worked for the largest by volume crypto ATM company in the world called CoinFlip. I was chief operating officer and chief revenue officer there. Had a couple different roles. And then I left there to join a company called CryptoFi that builds into the banking and credit union infrastructure to help credit unions and banks allow their customers to buy, hold, and sell crypto. I then left that to be CEO of a prop trading company called Top Tier Trader here in Miami. And then I left there and I rejoined CryptoFi now as president, but now it's called Investify because we've added equities and ETFs and things like that. So,
you've held like these like leadership positions at all these companies, different sizes. I remember I was talking to a recruiter not long ago, and it's funny how like two people can look at the same thing and have different perceptions of it. And she looked at my background. I've had some mobility over the last few years. And she said, yeah, like I forgot exactly what she said, but her response made me feel like I was a job hopper or something.
Right.
I looked at that experience and I thought, man, I've learned a little bit about a lot. I might not be a specialist, but I'm a generalist about a lot of things. And it's helped me in my current role. Do you think of it that way as well? Like, do you think like those experiences, maybe it's been a whirlwind? Do you feel like maybe it's made there's a silver lining in terms of what you've learned from it over the last few years?
Well, you definitely learn something different at every company, that's for sure. Both about business, but also about yourself. In my case, I would say in most of the case, the hopping wasn't necessarily my decision. But I think when you get to the role, the kind of role that I generally play, what's interesting, and Elon Musk made this comment where he's like, everyone wants to be CEO or president, any really senior level. people want to be in that senior leadership role. And he's like, you might want to think that one through. It's like, you basically have to work on the toughest problems that nobody else knows how to solve. Right. And it's also like, what does the company need? And so what I like about the role that I often play, like me coming back to Investify, was I know there are some areas where I can be useful. And fortunately, because I'm old and I've had a lot of experience and I've made a lot of mistakes, that I know where I can be useful and I can wear a lot of different hats. When I ran the telemedicine company, I'd never managed sales before, ever. And I'd never done direct sales like that myself, but that's what the company needed. And I figured it out. And so for me, I think that what I like about it is I've almost always come into businesses I had no background in. Like I said, I've been in crypto twice, but other than that, I've never been in the same industry twice. And I actually think that's an advantage because I don't look at the way it's always been done. I look at it with a fresh perspective, and I'm a reasonably smart guy. I listen really carefully. And anytime, the first thing I do when I come into a new company is I interview every single person in the company. It doesn't matter whether there's 20 people, 50 people, 100 people. I interview everybody. And you'd be amazed if you listen carefully and you synthesize what people tell you, how much you can glean from what needs to get done. They have the answers. They just don't have all the pieces of it because they haven't taken the time to listen to everybody.
Yeah. What would you say is your superpower then?
My ability to listen and synthesize. I really do think that, and I will say the other thing that I think I'm uniquely good at is I'm really good at business models, because I have this philosophical thing, and anyone who's got a sales background will know that alignment of incentives is just critical. And it's shocking how many companies cap the commissions a salesperson can make. Why would you do something so stupid? And yet so many companies, shockingly large number of companies do that. So I'm really good at, I really think what I'm good at is thinking about how to align incentives, whether it's through channel partnerships, or when I did this at the telemedicine company, we were charging 10 times. So Teladoc was the 800-pound gorilla in our space. They had 90% market share. They were publicly traded. And the next closest one had like 2% market share. And we had like 0.001% or something like that. We won 100% of our clients over the next 5 years from Teladoc, and we were 10 times the price. And I got zero pushback on price because of our business model. We contractually guaranteed 125% return on whatever they spent with us, hard dollar savings. No one else would do that. And all we had to do in order to deliver that was deliver higher utilization. So we invested in our customer support team, our customer success team, basically to make sure we were able to drive utilization. And so we could charge 10 times the price, get zero pushback, and be more profitable than the biggest company in the industry.
That's pretty cool. There's something to be said about what you explained, like going into new industries. It makes me think of this guy I recently talked to. Success in 3 different industries. Every 5 years or so, he sort of pivots. I mean, like a software company, a derivatives company, like a CPG company where you can grow plants at home through a hydroponic plant system. He financed 20 movies. I mean, just crazy. And so like his thing was like, when you don't know what has been done before, you go in with like this sort of open mindset. And so I do think, after hearing him back then, it just made me think like, wow, there are some advantages not having, not doing something for so long. He said he would not hire developers from banks because you're trained to not break the system, so his philosophy was different. But I'd love to talk about that. I mean, you've probably hired, fired, and try to, create the playbook for a lot of these companies. What have you seen as some of the trends just in terms of like building the right culture through hiring over the years?
Culture is really tricky, and there's art and science to it. I will tell you that, remember I said that I think I've learned more in the last 5 years than I have in the rest of my career combined.
Did you say that? I might have missed it.
Oh, yeah, well, I might have said the rest of my career combined, but I said it was a whirlwind. But the last 5 years, but even this last year, I had an insight that I will now take with me for the rest of any other businesses that I'm involved in. And I now use humility as the number one criteria in hiring, because if someone isn't humble, it doesn't matter what their talent stack looks like, doesn't matter what they're good at. If you're not humble, genuinely humble, not faking it. You won't take in new information. And even if you're brilliant, you're wrong a lot of the time. And that's if you're brilliant. Like most people are wrong half the time. And so you can't be sure this isn't part of that time you're wrong. And so having a team that's built where everyone is humble and is willing to listen to everyone else's point of view is critical. And the other thing you have to do is if there's anyone that's breaking that mold, you got to get rid of them. I mean, it's like, the rotten apple spoils the barrel is 100% true. And so the challenge is you don't always have full autonomy to make all the decisions. And that's where it gets really tricky. Last company I was at, like there's almost always some nepotism, right? And so you'll also have situations where someone's unfireable, right? And so you'll have situations like, well, okay, now what do I do? And so those can be really tricky.
I mean, I like that. Just to double click on, there's Pat Lencioni, leadership author. He wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Oh, great book.
All those books you see in airports, right? And the ideal team player, he said, hungry, humble, and smart are the 3 qualities that like people should be looking for. And I'll have to send you this blog post. It's so good. And it's almost like he saw the future, but he talks about the NFL draft when Johnny Manziel came out. Everyone knew this guy was like
a mess,
a prick, right? Yeah. But his 40 time was great, right? Or he was talented. And on the flip side, Teddy Bridgewater, also drafted the same year, was being touted as like the potential Heisman candidate, to win that. And Teddy Bridgewater said like, hey, like he didn't want any attention. He didn't want to do interviews about it. He just wanted to focus on his team. So like 2 sort of polar opposite personalities. And so the humility part, I think, is maybe, and obviously Monday morning quarterbacking this, we can see what happened with his career. But hungry, meaning like, I know you and I agree about this, but like hungry meaning like, are you just going to do the absolute minimum and then check out? Or are you willing to sort of go above and beyond? Humility. And then smart being that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but can you trust that person in a board meeting or an important meeting that they're not going to say something stupid, right? Yeah. So I love the way that he describes it.
Well, it's funny that at this last business at Top Tier, I hired this guy. He was 24 at the time, now 25, now all of 25, ran my whole marketing team. I originally brought him in for a much smaller role. And he changed that one hire changed the entire culture of the company. He just got after it. And he was always looking for more responsibility. When other people on the team that were, had been there for a while, were looking for what's the minimum I can possibly do. And on the backs of him, everyone I hired after that was, more of that model. And not only that, the other thing that people underestimate, and this goes back to the question you asked about the culture, one of the best things about hiring really talented people is the only people they're going to bring into the organization are really talented people. So their network is gold. And, probably half a dozen, if not more, maybe 8 people we brought onto the team out of like 25 came from his network. And so they were all, he wasn't bringing them on unless they were going to kill it like he was.
Yeah. I bet he put his reputation on the line.
He did. And those people knew they weren't going to let him down in the same way he didn't want to let me down. It really, so that's the thing. It's like, we've all had that boss that you've worked for that, you'd crawl naked over broken glass for just because, they had your back and they really were thinking about your career. Yeah. Like I think the mistake people make, I think they make it even more frequently in bigger companies, but even in smaller companies, they think that by focusing on the company first and the person second, that gets them the best result. That's not my experience. My experience is I focus on the person first and the company second, which is not to mean that I always honor my fiduciary responsibility. If I'm a CEO of a company, president of a company, that's my responsibility, is to get the best result for the business. My experience is the way I get the best result is by focusing on the individual and what's important to them and what's the career path that's, because I've counseled people to not work for me anymore if that's what was in their best interest. Yeah. And by doing it that way, I got whatever transition period I needed because I've been so helpful to them. I've had people I had a kid who I was mentoring. He was making $50,000 a year. And he got an offer for $80,000 a year. And he came into my office to tell me, and he saw the look on my face. I was like, oh shit. And he's like, I turned it down. And I was like, oh, like you did? Are you crazy? I was thinking, are you crazy? But I'm like, look, I can't get you 80K right now. I said, but give me till the end of the year. It was like in May. I got him a raise in July, and then I got him, at the beginning of the year, I got him to where he should have been. And, but the reason he was willing to do that was because why he was willing to turn down that job offer and give me the opportunity to make his salary where it needed to be was because I'd made an investment in him personally.
Wow. What do you think is, like, looking back, the best compliment you've ever received at work or as a leader? What would you say?
um, I'm not sure if this is a compliment exactly, but
Backhanded is fine too.
the demonstration of it, I guess, sort of was the guy who ran my trade desk at both CoinFlip and now at Investify. When I left, he was quite upset that I was leaving, and he got me a small plot of land that's like 2 feet by 2 feet or something in Ireland, and I guess now I'm technically Sir David Guttman or something like that, or I forget exactly that. But he gave me that and a long heartfelt note with it about how much I changed his life, and that was a wonderful compliment.
That's pretty cool. You never forget those, I imagine. What do you think are some of the biggest hiring differences when you think about small companies, maybe like, say, sub 50 to larger companies? What are some of the differences that you sort of notice?
Well, it's tricky because, and I would say, like, there's differences too, like the kind of person who's really helpful in a pure startup pre-revenue versus you've got some revenue, but not anywhere near profitable. Also depends how much capital you've raised, how much money, how much, fuel you have. Once you get above 50, it depends on the industry a little bit, but once you get above 50, you're starting to organize by function. Before that, it's much more based on the skills of the individuals. And so you have a much more kind of bespoke kind of structure generally when you're smaller. And so the Swiss Army knife employee is really critical to your success. And I would say, that becomes less true as you get bigger. And part of the challenge is, because in a perfect world, you want everyone to be able to make the journey with you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just not how it plays out sometimes. And so I think in the beginning, that Swiss Army knife employee, that person who you definitely need, the person who's 100% has to be a self-starter. I mean, the reality is in any kind of startup, I would say even up to like 150 employees, if it's being well managed, there's nowhere to hide, right? Once you get about 150, there's almost always some places to hide. Bigger companies, obviously, it's
Let's say you're you're sitting around the office and you've got a few of your colleagues. It's a startup. I mean, you guys are in the ideation phase. When you think about the most important quality of those early on sort of employees, is it the Swiss Army knife, or are you looking for specialists at something?
For the most part, I'm looking for people that are relentless. So it's not really a skill set. Now, I think there are exceptions.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, like for instance, like if you're doing software development, right? Like there, you're going to need someone who, and I would say too, like you're trying to build a consumer-facing product, or you're trying to do marketing to to consumers. That requires special expertise. That is, you don't want someone to be learning on the job for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I would say the vast majority of positions, 80%, it's more about finding someone that's got the heart, that's got the hustle, that's smart.
Is there like a cheat code, or how do you test for the relentless?
I check especially when I'm running a business and there's anyone I'm hiring from my team, I check at least one reference myself, no matter what. Even if I have other HR people that could do it, they can check the other references, but I'm going to check at least one myself.
What are you kind of saying though? Because obviously if someone's going to say like they're great, hopefully they're giving you a good reference, obviously. But what is there a trick in terms of the?
Well, I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit here, but one of the things I do is a little bit of a white lie, but I tell the person I've already made the decision to hire them. So when I check the reference, I'm like, I'm already hiring them. Don't worry about that. I said, I just want to know how to make sure that I can manage them in the best way possible so that they're as productive as they possibly could be. And so that's really what I want to try to dig in, kind of hone in on. The reality is I've mostly decided I want to hire them.
Yeah. But now they've relaxed on their answer.
Yeah, now they've relaxed, and now they're actually trying to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I'm, again, not my first rodeo, so I know how to ask questions without it seeming, intimidating, I'm not necessarily coming directly at the thing I'm trying to get at. The other thing is when I'm interviewing the person, Elon Musk talks about this a little bit. It's like when someone tells you about a problem they've solved, that maybe they were just one of the people that solved it and there was a whole team of people, or maybe they just know the person that solved it. They can only answer questions about an inch deep once you get a little bit further down. And so if you know how to interview people and kind of really like walk me through that, like as you tell someone ask someone in an interview, what's the thing you're most proud of in your entire professional career? And they don't get really animated and excited and they can't tell you every last detail about everything they did, you know, and by telling you every last detail, you'll understand. Yeah. And I didn't sleep for 4 days before we released and like you'll hear that in their story and you'll be able to tell.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You got a young daughter. I feel like the job market has changed, like the way you have to think about managing your career maybe has changed over time. What are just some general sort of advice or guidelines you've given her about managing her career?
So my daughter's 24 now. She got a good job right out of college. And I would say it was super intense. They were pre-IPO. It was a startup feel, but had like 1,500 people. So had tons of revenue, lots of employees, even a fair amount of bureaucracy. Her group though was super small and nimble and they were working crazy hours. She was working 60, 70-hour weeks. She learned, I would say she progressed what you would normally see people progress in 10 years professionally. She did in 2, but she also was thinking that, hey, if I get hit by a truck on Sunday, maybe I won't have to go to work on Monday. So I convinced her to get another job because I don't want her getting hit by a truck to not have to go to work. So, and my advice to her was don't worry about the industry. Don't worry about even the job function you're going to do. Focus on 2 things: who you work for, like the person you're directly working for, and adding things to your talent stack. So, the rule of thumb is if you spend 100 hours a year, which is 18 minutes a day on anything, you'll be in the top 5%, of people in the world on that thing. Could be knitting, could be playing the piano, doesn't matter what it is. I'm like, pick 2 things a year and get in the top 5% of those 2 things. And it doesn't matter what they are, just things that you're interested in. So find things to add to your talent stack and make sure that wherever you work next, the person you're working directly for, you feel is emotionally invested in your succeeding.
Yeah. Keith Raboy, who we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
He lives around here somewhere. I never forget, he said, because I saw him as this sort of generalist, like law degree, business guy. And when I kind of solicited him for this advice, he said, don't be good at what you do, be the best at what you do. In that sort of 5%. I was
Right.
That's really cool. What do you think is career advice she should ignore?
Do what you love. I think that, I think you love it. I think most people love things they're really good at. It's not 100% true, but it's kind of hard to hate something when you're the absolute best at it, And so I think directionally you want to do things that you have directional interest in. So as an example, I would say, we're probably not the best. I would never want to work in a company that did things that harmed people, right? So alcohol, tobacco, things like that. I think, I don't. I'm not judging. That's not what I want to spend my life doing, right?
Yeah.
So if I want to build a company and build the people within it, I want to do something I feel good about. I mean, even the last business I was in, you could argue it was more of a gambling business. And so for me, in order for that to make sense for me, the direction I pivoted the business into was education. Because ultimately my goal was to make everyone as good a trader as they possibly could be. And by doing so, I could feel really good about the business we were in. And it was a better business model. It de-risked the entire business because the other side of the business was really fraught with regulatory risks. And so for me, I think that, you have to feel good about what you're doing. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
One question around this, I was just thinking about, sports and culture building and team building and things like that. Is there an analogy or a connection that you make, whether it be the John Woodens of the world, but you think about like building a company? Is there a connection sort of between sports that you think about often as you do that?
I think it's a little, there clearly is overlap. I think that whether it's parenting, coaching, mentoring, leading, that those have a lot of things in common. The one thing that's a little different, at least my leadership style, I'm a servant leader. I see my job is to remove obstacles. I think when you're the coach of a sports team, and I played 4 sports in high school and 1 in college, and both team sports and individual sports. I feel like to be a terrific coach at that level, it has to be, uh, it can't always be what's best for the individual isn't necessarily what's best for the team. And so I feel like they're less servant leaders.
Mm.
Not that they don't serve and remove obstacles for the people that they coach. They certainly do. But I feel like it's less true than it is, I think, for the kind of corporate leader that I think is most useful.
You wrestled for quite a while, right?
I wrestled all through college, yeah.
What is a lesson or two that comes to mind about wrestling that you think is important, whether it be business or just general in life, that you feel like people can learn about?
Wrestling is one of the is a very unique sport. And like I said, I probably played 8 or 9 sports competitively throughout my life. And wrestling has this one unique aspect to it that no other sport that I'm aware of does, which is, at least in the high school and middle school age range, if you gave me a kid in 7th grade who'd never wrestled before, didn't matter if he was short and fat, dumb, smart, fast, slow, like wouldn't matter. If that kid did everything I told him to, by his senior year, he'll win 75% of his matches. I don't know any other sport like that. Other sports require some natural ability, coordination, whatever it might be. At least at the high school level, if you're just better prepared than the person you're competing against, you will win 75% of the time. And I feel like that's kind of like what life is like.
Yeah.
It's like showing up is most of it. And again, you see this all the time, the David Goggins of the world. It's consistency that wins the day. I'll take consistency over talent all day.
Do you think there's such a thing as over preparation?
You can certainly overtrain. Okay. In fact, I know I was guilty of that in my college career. Definitely overtrained, and you get injuries and stuff like that. Yeah, you can take anything to excess. If you were to, at the end of the day, can you compete if you haven't slept, if you haven't, because you're literally, that's all you're doing is staying up and thinking in your mind about how you're going to deal with whatever's going on. So yeah, I think you can over prepare, but I think that that's generally not the problem. I think most people under prepare.
Yeah, that makes sense. Part of preparing is making sure you're getting that sleep to recover too, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. When you think about the most difficult hiring decision you've ever made, what comes to mind?
So the hardest hiring decisions are going to be those that affect others, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, you have to hire someone over someone else who, and again, like in some cases, throughout my career, in some cases it's actually funny. Sometimes I've had full autonomy, but not a lot of money. Sometimes I've had a lot of money, but not a lot of autonomy. Sometimes I've had a mix of both. And so you have situations, actually when I was back at CoinFlip, the guy who ran my trade desk, again, he originally got hired as like practically a minimum wage employee. And then he was running the trade desk and he did an unbelievable job. Leadership was uncomfortable with him being the head of the trade desk. So they made me hire a guy above him, Northwestern grad, finance background, had the right pedigree, whatever. He was completely useless. We're paying him $200,000 a year. He had a negative value. And then we eventually fired him and just had the kid in charge again.
Interesting.
So I think anytime you're making a hiring decision where it's going to affect other people, those are the trickiest. It's anything that can mess with the culture or the chemistry of the team. So I think a sports analogy is a really good one, which is anything that can mess with the chemistry of the team can be problematic. And so those are the hardest hires to make.
What was the toughest fire you ever had to make?
So
you can keep it anonymous in a sense.
No, it's actually, I had to fire 50 people in one day. So that was the hardest. So what had happened was it was the call center business. So we're running this call center business and things are going great. We do the 13 acquisitions and they're going well and they're cash flowing like crazy and right to plan. Everything was going like that never happens. It was going exactly to plan. Probably because I hired those 3 ladies that knew what they were doing. So anyway, this was during the internet.com boom, and our cost labor at the time was 40% of our, so basically telephony was 10% of our revenue. People cost was 40%. We had 50% gross margins. Then, because in the dot-com boom, our cost of labor doubled in 6 months. So now it went from 40% of revenue to 80% of revenue. Now it went from wildly profitable to hemorrhaging money. And that all happened in 6 months. So now we're trying to raise capital under duress, which is impossible to do. And when you can do it, it's at terms that are just so horrific. It's like, why even bother? So more by luck than skill, we stumble on this guy who has a 400-person call center in Unity, Maine, population like 500. Okay, literally, when I say small town, I'm literally like 500 people in the whole town. And the call center is empty. And the guy's in his 80s and in failing health. And he said, I'll invest $3 million. I'll give you the call center usage for free for 2 years. But you have to move your call center from the one we had in New Jersey up to Maine, which is 50 jobs. Wow. So I had to fire 50 people and hire 50 people in Unity, Maine. And I could have had my head of HR do it, but I did it. I went down to myself and I explained to them exactly why. And I said, look, I could not fire you today. I'll be letting you go in 4 weeks when we run out of money. I said, and I won't be able to give you any severance. I'm going to give you a little bit of severance now because it's all we can do. And then 48 of the 50 people said, 2 were pissed. And the other 48 were like, I do exactly what you are doing. I totally understand. And yeah, it sucks, but I understand. But that was a really tough day.
Yeah, I can only imagine what firing one person's like, nonetheless, more than that. When you think about a setback or a failure that you've learned from, maybe there's an inflection point that was tough. Like what comes to mind, life, work, career wise? What is that sort of, I'm sure you're a humble guy, so I'm sure there's many failures and setbacks, but like what's one that comes to mind that you think is important to share?
Well, you said it could be personal. Getting divorced, getting divorced, there's no way to look at that other than a failure. And you could decide where the failure was, the person I picked or, whatever, where along that process it was. But I think the thing that it taught me was that, and this is true whether it's in personal relationships or professional relationships, friendships, doesn't really matter, is you have to be honest with yourself first. And then assuming you can accomplish that, you have to be honest with the other person. And I think when you do that, I think the path forward becomes really clear. All the noise and fog kind of parts and the path forward seems obvious. And so I guess that would be the thing that I learned. And I remember, as weird as it's going to sound, I got divorced when I was 35. My daughter was only 1. In a weird way, it's the decision I'm the most proud of that I've made in my entire life, because it was the hardest to make, because everyone, and I mean everyone with zero exceptions, is telling me, you can't get divorced. Your daughter's so young. I said, I'm not abandoning my daughter. I said, I'm just, abandoning the relationship that I'm certain isn't going to work. And again, if I wasn't absolutely certain that our marriage wasn't going to work out, I would not have made that decision. Now, in hindsight, I should have seen it sooner and could have avoided the pitfalls or whatever, but then I wouldn't have my daughter, and that worked out amazing. So I think that it's one of the single most difficult things to do is to be honest with yourself, because if you do that, then you have to take action. And I think that almost all problems could be avoided if you could just do those 2 simple things: be honest with yourself and be honest with others.
Yeah, that's great. I know you're a huge Scott Galloway fan. He says like who you marry, right? Or what does he say? Like punch above your weight class and who you marry is one of his pieces of advice.
Well, it's funny you say that. Because I have a different view of it, actually. Not that, my wife isn't amazing. She is, but I think that I think it's important. I think and I think, again, I've yet to meet a woman who brags about the garbage man she started dating. Women want to date, guys that are smarter than them and that are more successful than them. And I feel that men want to be with women that are more attractive than them and more nurturing than them and more of a caretaker. And I know that's more traditional gender roles, but I generally think that the relationships, at least that I see, that tend to be happier, look more like that. I know that might get me canceled in some circles, but that's that's my view of it.
I love it. You and I were talking about this offline. I'm just curious to get your take on this. A lot of the CEOs that we see in the sort of the Fortune 500, 1000, they're typically not the career path of your typical HR person or CHRO leader? Why do you think that is that they come from sort of the CFO ranks, maybe sometimes the CMO ranks, but oftentimes COO, CFO? Why do you think that is less of the CHRO?
I think that the HR function traditionally does not attract the best talent, right? And so it's like anything else. The fact that um, the people coming out of Harvard are more talented has nothing to do with Harvard and the education they get. It has to do with the fact that the only people that get in, and this is maybe less true now, but it used to be really true. It was so stringent that, they are only letting people in that are going to be successful,
Right.
no matter where they go to school, right? Like if I were born, I went to 2 Ivy League schools. If I were born today, I would never have gone to college or business school. Not a chance. I'd be starting businesses in middle school. I would have never gone to college. And so, I think ultimately, what ends up happening is the people, HR doesn't attract the same level of talent. I think that if I were running a Fortune 500 company, which I never will, but if I were running a Fortune 500 company, I would take someone from marketing or operations and I would make them my head of HR, and I would change the incentive structure so that they're incentivized to build the kind of talent team that I would want. And I think if you were to do that, you can completely flip that on its head. And then that same person could be the kind of person who would become a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. But I think that's why it doesn't happen, is because the talent pool that they're starting with is weak.
Interesting. I've got a couple rapid fire ones for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything around hiring, just trends, anything like that you wanted to talk about that maybe that we missed?
Trends. I think that there's it's not really a trend. It's the opposite of what I think people are talking about in the trend. Oh, kids these days, they're lazy, what have you, and so forth. The hardest working people, my last company, were all young, 22. I had a just turned 21-year-old kid, rebuilt our entire website like in his spare time over the week. I mean, these kids were, in Cali, Colombia, of all places, who were paying like practically nothing. And I compare that to the kid who, went to an Ivy League school who, clocks out at 4:30 and takes a 2-hour lunch. It's like, so I think that a lot of it is about hiring smart, that if you pay attention, there's a lot of really hardworking, really talented people. So I think that's a bit of that's something that's true. And so in terms of the trends, I think the remote work thing is tricky. The company I work for now is fully remote. It started during COVID. It has never had an office. It will never have an office. And I do think that presents some real challenges. It's harder to build culture. And I also I think it's unreasonable to expect you're going to get the same amount of effort from all of your people, certainly.
And collaboration.
Yeah, and in collaboration is tougher. So, yeah, but I think that the virtual trend is. I know a lot of companies are now insisting on people coming back into the office 5 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think that trend is going to it's going to continue. I think that virtual is going to remain much more common. I think companies are going to have to find more clever ways to try to build culture and collaboration. I think augmented reality and some of the other stuff, I think, will help in ways. I think 10 years from now, it'll be a very different thing than how it is now. Everyone can have the corner office, maybe, and then kind of pop into the office and write stuff on the whiteboard. We'll see.
Yeah. Is there a career accomplishment you're most proud of?
I guess I'd have to put them into two categories. I can't ignore the financial ones. I had, one middle 8 and one 9-figure exit. And I'm very proud of those because I played a huge role in both of those. One of those companies was, 6 months away from bankruptcy, and within, 18 months we were in the Inc. 500 2 years in a row. So I feel a lot of
so turning it around
by pivoting the business model. I feel really proud of that. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of professionally. But the other piece that related to that is the number of people I've mentored over the years, and just having them come back to me and tell me how much it meant to them.
Love it.
So.
Fast forward 20 years from now. What do you hope your daughter says about you as a dad?
Wow. No one's ever asked me that. I guess that I was a good human being. Just that.
I think that would be very good if she said that.
Yeah.
Is there a book or two that's made a big impact on you that you recommend other people read?
Yeah. Influenced by Robert Cialdini, probably the best book on persuasion I've ever read. 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, and uh, How to Lose It Almost Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams. Those three.
What did you like about the 48 Laws?
Well, the first one that I've unfortunately violated a few times, which is never outshine the master. I would say of all the books that I wish I had read 25 years ago, it was that one would be the one I put above every other book.
Can you tell me about that lesson though? That law of power? Never outshine the master, he said.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Everywhere I've ever worked. Yeah. It's, and people want you to do well, but not too well. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I've made so many mistakes. I can't even count them all. I'm not perfect. It's not like I haven't made mistakes. Not about that. It's that, but I think I do bring a unique set of skills because I am very disciplined. I work very hard, and I think because I am genuinely open to being wrong about literally everything. I think it allows me to synthesize information in a way that most people don't. Because I think most people, in fact, I think people frequently mistake my confidence for arrogance. I don't think I'm arrogant at all, but I am confident, and but I'm able to balance that with the fact that I'm pretty confident I'm right about this, but I could be wrong, and I'm open to being wrong. And so, yeah, I feel like I think I lost the question actually now.
No, it's good. I've never read that book. I mean, each book you mentioned is one that's like on my list. I'll pick them up,
So
never outshine your master.
So it's the challenge is, you have to be sensitive to, you want to get something done, and getting it done is important. But I think I have made the mistake before where I prioritize getting it done over getting it done with consensus. And sometimes it's because, we're in a hurry, but sometimes the turtle wins over the hare.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. Okay. Last question. Let's say you're talking to someone early on in their career, they're really ambitious and they want to make their mark in this world. What are a couple pieces of life/career advice you would impart on them?
I would try to find a couple of professional mentors. And I would be really thoughtful about how I did that. I didn't do that early in my career, and I wish I had. It's easier to do now through things like LinkedIn and so forth, but I think that's enormous. I would focus on I would focus less on outcomes and more on the process, meaning, like I said, I'd be trying to add things to my talent stack every year, because I think that the best path forward is almost always not viewable from your current point of view. And so you have to get further down the corridor to be able to see the outcome that's the one that's optimal, or even, more optimal even. And so that requires you to go further on the journey. And I think if you get too focused on the goal and not on the process, that you miss that. So be a little bit less goal oriented and a little bit more systems and process oriented, and find some mentors. And I guess the other one is, and this one I absolutely practice, is really focus on not having a blind spot. It's okay to have weaknesses. That's fine. But you can't think you're good at something you're bad at. And make sure you've got some people in your circle, your inner circle, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, parent, sibling, whatever, that you know will be honest with you and help you see your blind spots because they're hard to see yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that's something I struggle with. I talk about quite a bit is
Right.
like, I can't see my blind spots. And so I think that's great advice to surround yourself with people who will hopefully tell you what some of those are so you can work on them.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate this, David. This was great. Thanks for leaning into it.
No,
This is
thank
awesome.
you. I really appreciate the questions. It was a real pleasure.